Good morning. We're going to, well, I guess this is part two, isn't it? So you've already had a good morning. Okay, so we just finished up with the tissues, the shoot, apical, meristem, and primary growth. So now we're going to get into the differences of the stem anatomy in monocots and dicots. And so we're going to talk a little bit about those differences with the stem and also with the root, because depending on whether or not it's a monocot or a dicot will determine structurally how the vascular bundles are oriented. That's primarily the main difference between monocots and dicots, is just their arrangement of their um, vascular bundles. So kind of a quick little review about monocots and dicots, if you are not familiar with them. First of all, we're going to kind of go back and talk about vascular and non-vascular plants. Um, so just kind of a difference here um, between those, because monocots and dicots are actually a subdivision of your vascular plants. So, and I don't think we've talked about them yet. So, alrighty. With your non-vascular plants, as the name implies, they don't have a vascular system, so they don't have xylem or phloem. That being said, they're going to be more what I would call simple plants anatomically. So they're going to be shorter in height because they're not going to have those tissues to transport sugar, nutrients, and water. So they can't reach great heights because they don't have that ability to transport those things. So they're usually shorter in height. They do not reproduce using seeds. So, um, so yeah, that's just kind of the way they are. So some examples of those are ferns and mosses. Now there are some ferns that are actually vascular, but for the most part, most ferns are considered to be non-vascular. So and mosses, um, very very short, look like a carpet. So like I said, a little simpler, no vascular system, don't reproduce using seeds. So that's kind of them in a nutshell. So or funny. Anyway, vascular plants. These, like the name implies, are going to have a vascular system, which we've kind of already talked a little bit about on the shoot apical meristem. We were talking about vascular plants because with the non-vascular plants, obviously, we're not going to have proto or metaxylem or phloem or any of that business. So because they have a vascular system, they're able to be a little bit taller or much taller. These are going to be, you're going to have a lot of variety in these plants, way more so than your non-vascular plants. They are going to reproduce seeds, which is where kind of the monocot and dicot version comes to be. Sperma is Latin, and that means seed. So just depending on which method they use, they can be classified further as an angiosperm or a gymnosperm. So both of these produce seeds. Your angiosperms, if you have studied plants at all, those are your flowering plants. Your gymnosperms are your cone-bearing plants, so like your conifers and evergreens. Okay, so we're going to look specifically at your vascular plants because this is going to be the difference between your monocots and your dicots. Within your angiosperms, you're going to get monocots and dicots. With your gymnosperms, they're not classified into monocots and dicots. So the way that you differentiate your angiosperms is dependent on what type of seed they have. And kind of I don't know if this is a refresher or a brand new, but that's the job of the fruit, is to protect the seed. So all of your angiosperms are flowering plants, and flowering plants produce fruit. generally to house and protect that seed. So depending on if you're a monocot or a dicot, your vascular tissue is going to be arranged differently, which is kind of what I implied here at the very beginning. So so yeah, and like I don't know if I said this or not, but your gymnosperms, they they are the cone producer, so they don't reproduce with flowers. So if it has a flower, it's an angiosperm, and depending on the seed, it's going to be a monocot or a dicot. So hopefully that's kind of making some sense here. Monocot and dicot are short for a monocotyledon and dicotyledon, and as that prefix implies, you're talking about one versus two cotyledons. Okay, so then we just shorten those names into monocots and dicots. If you look at your diagram here, that's one cotyledon. At the very top, it kind of looks like a teardrop. So your shoot apical meristem is that darker dot there in the center. From that, the root's going to be produced when it starts growing. And then you've got your cotyledon, which is the bigger, emptier space. So some examples of monocotyledons, I've got corn, orchids, and lilies. With your dicotyledons, you're going to have two cotyledons. So your legumes, your beans, and your those in your peanuts family. Think about your peanut when you open it up. There's two halves of that peanut. So one side is a cotyledon and the other side is a cotyledon. And if you look really carefully, you can kind of see that growth there where the shoot apical meristem is there. If you ever dissect a peanut, next time you eat a peanut, look at it, because you'll know some of the parts now. But that's where the root and everything would grow if you were to plant that particular seed. And so that's what we mean by a monocotyledon and a dicotyledon. Just think of like a corn kernel, which is only one, versus the peanut, which splits into two sides, meaning it's a dicotyledon. And so some other examples would be lettuce and oak trees. So monocotyledons are usually considered to be a little more simpler than a dicotyledon, but in the grand scheme of things, I mean, they're still both complex. It's just in comparison to one another, the dicots are a little more complex. So we'll stop there because you've already had about 25 minutes of a lecture. So this is just another 10 minutes to kind of introduce you to monocots and dicots. Tomorrow we'll compare the actual stem structures between the monocots and the dicots. So hope you have a good day.